So there are about 20 more we're gonna join. Hi, everyone. We're so excited. We are joining, okay, for our big Queller Prep webinar. Aren't we so excited? Who else does a 2-hour webinar? No one does this. And it's my children's first day of school. So I just want you to know my priorities are with the families of Queller Prep. All right, hold on. We're good.
Hi guys, welcome to our webinar. We're just going to give everybody a few minutes because we're expecting a lot of people to settle down and everybody to join, and then we will start shortly. Hi everybody, welcome. So I'm going to start shortly. We're still expecting a few more people, so I'm going to give everybody until like 7:05 and admit everybody in the waiting room, and then we'll start shortly. So just sit tight, and then I'll do introductions and we'll start. But thank you so much for joining on time. You guys are awesome. Okay, guys, I'm going to give everybody one more minute. I'm still admitting people from the waiting room, and then we're going to join and we're just going to get started in 1 minute. I'll do an introduction and then we'll jump right into it. And again, thank you everybody so much for joining on time.
Yes, and everyone, I just want to tell you, my name is Frances Queller. I'm so happy they're here right now, and we are moving and shaking and moving ahead with Queller Prep with our very special webinar. Olga, I just put you on spotlight. I'm very excited about this webinar because we're going to cover everything that we need to know for SHSE. This is a very special meeting that we're in right now, and we're exactly everyone we've begin at this point, and we're going to move from here. The best starting place right now is going to be the SHSE handbook, and this handbook is not physically printed anymore by the DOE. So, book to no book. Keep in mind that too, you will have the link. I will put.
Okay, guys, so Mrs. Frances Queller's audio was no good, so I think she left and she's going to just rejoin shortly to kind of give us an introduction because she was having some connection issues.
We're right now. Okay, so are you hear me, right, Olga?
It's coming in and out.
That's okay. That's fine. I will use a different audio. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, guest.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Okay, guys, so welcome to our official SHSAT webinar. I've hosted these in the years prior, but I think this is a new cohort. So we're about 2 months away from your big exam. It's September 5th, and the exam was recently announced to be on November 8th, which is why Mrs. Queller planned this webinar with me to kind of give you guys a big overview of what to expect on the exam, what's the exam format, what kind of questions will be thrown at you, and just my general advice on strategies and how to prepare. As Miss Queller was saying before her audio ran out, the very best resource that there is to study for this exam is their released handbook, which was linked to you in the email inviting you to this webinar. And that's going to be the primary place that we're going to be pulling from today. So within this handbook is kind of a full guideline of how to prepare for this test. They give you sample questions, which are really important, and I want to dissect those with you and kind of point out the different ways they ask questions, the different things that I want you to pay attention to as you're preparing for this exam. And additionally, there's also 2 full practice tests in this exam, in this handbook as well, which I cannot recommend enough. Those are extremely, extremely, extremely important for you guys as you prepare for this exam. You 100% have to do both of these exams in a timed fashion, and they're going to be a good judge on where you stand and how to improve. And they're going to be good predictors for how you will do on the real exam, okay? So, let me just introduce myself quickly, and then we'll kind of jump into the very basic structure of the exam for anybody who's completely new to the studying process, and then we'll work out of this handbook. Okay, so my name is Olga. I'm an old-time Queller Prep tutor for many, many years, and I have been working with Mrs. Frances Queller, hosting these SHSAT webinars also for a few years since the pandemic. I'm currently in my 4th year of medical school. So if you guys, I know you guys are young, but if anybody is already interested in medicine or anything like that, I'm more than happy to take questions at the end. And I have also graduated from a specialized high school. My family was from Staten Island, New York, and I went to Staten Island Tech. So I'm a very, very proud alum. It's an excellent school, and it stands next to all of the other specialized high schools, which are all excellent. And I truly believe that it put me in the position to be the absolute best student that I could be and gain admission to the absolute best colleges that I could, and then get into medical school without taking any time off. So I think it's really, really, really important that we get a good high school education, which is why I dedicate my time to doing things like this. So the way that I like running the webinar is I'm just going to be talking a lot, and I tend to talk a little bit quickly. So if it's too fast, please let me know in the chat. Give me live feedback as it's going on in the chat, and I'll try to cater to everybody's needs. We have a big group, so I don't let you guys unmute yourself just because I don't want it to get chaotic and people over speak on one another. So if you have any questions at all, just put it in the chat and I'll be moderating the chat the entire time. And Miss Queller is also online moderating the chat. So we'll be doing our best to tag team and answer the questions in the chat as they come up. And if you need me to repeat anything, or if you have a specific question based on what I said, again, we'll try to answer those as they come in. And then I'll do my best to sort of save the last 15 minutes or so. So we have a dedicated Q&A portion in the end as well, okay? All right, does anybody have any sort of beginning questions based on my introduction or anything that we just said?
Olga, I'm back on. I'm good. Let's jump right in. And everyone, I will put the guide into the chat right now. This is definitely your SHSAT Bible. So please remember, this is not printed anymore as far as I'm aware. So just remember, this is what we have. We're going to work with the links. Okay, go ahead. I'm putting this into the chat.
Okay, so this is our handbook. So before we jump right into this, I want to talk a little bit about the basic structure of this exam, just so you guys are aware. So you guys should know that the exam consists of 2 parts. There's an ELA section and there's a math section. So 2 parts to this exam. Both parts have an equal weight. So they both have 57 questions. So there's going to be 57 questions on the ELA and 57 questions on the math, for a total of 114 questions, obviously. Now, a few things that we should know. In the ELA, it's entirely multiple choice. So this whole section is multiple choice. And we'll see exactly the types of questions shortly as I scroll into the manual. But what you have to know is that the ELA is briefly broken up into 2 parts, and it's reading comprehension and it's grammar. And then the math is one big part, but it consists of a bunch of different types of questions. So algebra, geometry, logical reasoning, and we'll see that as we work towards the handbook. And the last thing that I want to mention as well is that in the math, it's mostly multiple choice, but there are 5 questions which they call grid in. So in those questions, you have to basically get your computation, get an answer, get some number, and then you grid in that number. So you don't get options. It's not multiple choice. And then the last thing that I want to mention is this test has changed fairly recently. So in 2018, there was a really big change to this exam. And it's really important that we think about where this exam came from because they're sort of remnants of the older exam and this new exam, which is kind of like a trick that the older tutors know to better prepare their students. So the older exam had a logical reasoning section. And what happened was when they dissolved the logical reasoning section, there are some remnants of that left over, mostly in the math section. So that's why it's very important. And that's one thing that we teach in the math topic is a few logical reasoning angled questions. And those are kind of skeletons or remnants from the old exam. Okay. So that was the basic overview of kind of what we are expected to tackle in this exam. So now let's go ahead and explore this handbook together. Okay, so in the handbook, like I said, there's a nice content page for you for when you're trying to sort of manage this yourself and know where to look in the handbook to sort of begin studying. This is to read sort of with your parents sometime before the test, but it's not for actually like studying the content of the test. So this whole section that I highlighted here in green is not important for us for content. This is important for actually what to bring to the test, what you're not allowed to bring to the test, expectations of the test. And then some of you guys are asking questions about gridding in. All of that will be here. So that would likely be found in this section here. But our focus for this webinar is going to be this section here, the actual content of the exam and how do we prepare and how do you study for it and what are the sort of questions that you should expect. So this is kind of the section that I want to be focusing on here. And then most importantly, for when you study by yourself are these sample tests. So this is an absolute must. Both of these exams are an absolute must for you guys to take independently timed. If we have some time, we will be able to go through some of these questions today. But we'll see. But 100% this must happen today. I'm gonna post the link to the handbook in the chat for everybody because I'm getting some messages that you guys don't have it. So just give me 1 second. Okay, so it's now in the chat for everybody. So you guys could go ahead and open it up so we could all be in the same page. Okay, so knowing what to expect and taking the practice test. So this is kind of what we were talking about before. I'm going to skip this page because it's kind of everything that I have said. So the description of the test, the 2 full-length sample tests, each test also in this handbook comes with its own answer key and explanation. So that is very, very, very important. And that's what you're gonna use to study as well. Okay, so let's jump to preparing for the ELA section. So everybody, I'm on 1.4 if you want to match me on your handbook. So we're all looking at the same page. So I'm at section 1.4. Okay, so how do we prepare for the ELA section? So like I opened, the ELA section will consist of 57 multiple choice questions. So that's right here. Those 57 multiple choice questions will go to 2 topics. One of those topics is revising and editing. So this is what I call sort of grammar. Another remnant from the old exam is that there used to be a scrambled paragraph section. That has since been dissolved, but they've sort of incorporated it into the grammar section. So I'll show you what I mean when we get to sample questions. So one section is revising and editing, and this will consist of both stand-alone questions, so just a question all by itself with one sentence, and it will also consist of passages/paragraphs.
And those of you who are at Queller Prep, we just refer to the grammar. That's it. Just this is a grammar related section.
Correct. The other section is reading comprehension. The other part of the reading comprehension, the other part of the ELA section, I should say, is reading comprehension. So the reading comprehension focus is you get full passages of different genres. So those passages could be nonfiction passages, they could be like newspaper articles, or they could be fictional stories, usually excerpts from some writing, and there's usually at least one poem as well. So all of that will be sort of tested on the reading comprehension section. There'll be anywhere between like 5 to 7 passages, and then multiple choice questions that follow those passages. And again, like I mentioned, those passages could be fictional excerpts, they could be nonfiction, they could be journal type articles, and they could be poems. And then you get questions, multiple choice questions following those passages that will test your understanding of what you just read. And those multiple choice questions will handle things like main idea, what did I just read about? Character development, how did the characters change from the beginning to the end? They will also test you on your detail ability, your ability to sort of pick up on details, your ability to make inferences. So all of those kinds of things are tested in the reading comprehension section. Okay, so let's go deeper into what revising and editing looks like. So here are some examples that the handbook is giving us. They can ask you to select the best correction for an error. So in this kind of case, what they will do is they will underline the mistake. And then they will say, which of the following is the best way to correct this mistake? So in these kinds of questions, they're already telling you that there is an error. They're already setting you up that there's something incorrect with the sentence. And when we say mistake, that could mean many different things. So that can mean there's a grammatical issue. So for example, there's a comma in a place a comma shouldn't be. So we can think about commas, we can think about semicolons, colons. So they can be like a structural issue in how the sentences are put together. There could also just be a word choice issue. And this is where we at Queller Prep recommend learning vocabulary for this exam as well. Even though vocab by itself is not a section on the exam, this is how it can come up. Or there could just be like paragraph type issues. So the sentences are in the wrong order. And that's, like I was telling you guys before, sort of a remnant from the scrambled paragraphs. So the first part is they're kind of telling you that there's an error already. So this is kind of an easier question because the question's already setting you up that there is a mistake. You just have to fix it. Now, the other type of question is they can ask you to identify a sentence with an error. So you're given several sentences in a paragraph to read, and you have to pick the sentence that has a mistake in it. So this is different because you have to actually find the mistake. And then finally, you can combine sentences or revise a part of the sentence. And again, this is all a remnant of the scrambled paragraph section. So this is the first part of revising and editing. Usually in my experience, there are 4 to 5 standalone questions that are a mix of these 3 things that the handbook discussed and that we just went over. And then after those 3 to 5 questions, there's then a passage. And the passage is not a reading comprehension passage, it's a grammar passage. And we'll see examples of all of this shortly. Okay, so how are we going to tackle this sentence, these types of questions? What are you guys gonna do? So obviously the very first thing that you're going to do is you're gonna read the question. I always recommend reading the question first, even when there's a passage for the revising section. So the important part the important way that you guys become good test takers is you understand what you're being tested on. So in the revising section, you're not being tested on your ability to understand what you're reading. It's not the reading comprehension test. It's the test of knowing the rules of grammar and knowing how to write well, how to combine things in a succinct fashion, and how to correctly combine things using the proper grammatical tools in the English language. So what that means is that it's not important the actual content of what you're reading. The actual sentences themselves are not important. It's not important for you to understand how one character relates to the other character in this particular section. In the reading comprehension section, which is upcoming, that's exactly what they're testing you for. But in this section, that's not what they're testing you for, which is why, and even in their own handbook, they suggest that you read the question first. You skim through all the questions, even when there's a passage, so you can understand what they're going to ask you about. So you can understand which sentences do they want you to focus on. Which paragraphs do they want you to focus on? And that way, when you read the passage, you know exactly what you need to be looking at. So the first thing we're going to do is you're going to read the question, regardless if it's standalone or a passage. So let's write that down. So even with the grammar passage, you're going to skip the passage momentarily and just look at the questions first. Okay, next, you're going to read the text in the box and you're going to take notes on any issues that you observe. So this is a really important test taking strategy. What they're saying is do not jump to the answer choices. You read the question and then you read the passage or you read the paragraph and you think in your head before you look at the options, do I notice a mistake? Is something fishy? Would I add a comma here? If I'm just reading my friend's essay and they ask me to edit it, would I fix this in any way? And you try to find the error yourself. You try to find the part of the sentence that you think has a mistake yourself. And then you try to edit that mistake yourself. How would you fix it? Would you combine those two sentences because they're too wordy? Would you add a semicolon? Is there a comma where one doesn't belong? Is it a run-on sentence? Whatever mistake that you identify, you then edit it. And then at that point, you then go to the answer choices and you find the answer that matches the plan that you've already made in your head. Because what happens to a lot of students is they might be able to identify the answer, but then they look at the choices, and the choices, the test is smart. They word things in a way that could be confusing sometimes to you guys. And they put good answers as choice A, and then you guys get all confused because you think choice A is the best choice. And then you're nervous because you're taking the test and you don't read choice B, C, and D, and you pick an okay answer, but you do not pick the best answer. So it's really important that you develop your own best answer first, and then you look at the answer choices, you read them very carefully, and you try to match whatever your answer was already in your head to that in the answer choice. It's really important for you guys to annotate the exam. So look, that's exactly what this handbook is telling you. Mark up the text. So they're telling you annotate. That's extremely important. That's going to make you guys better test takers. It's going to improve your focus as you're reading through the test, and you have to focus for that full 3-hour portion while you're taking the test. Annotation will help you with that. It will help you notice things that you otherwise wouldn't notice. So mark up the text, especially when you notice an issue. Try to repair that issue. So edit the issue yourself, edit the text, and then try to select whatever your edit as the answer options. But make sure that this whole time you are managing your time. And that's why we recommend that you practice. That's why we're doing this webinar. And that's why you guys are going to practice all these questions once again, even after I review them. And that's why you're going to take the practice test twice, because that way you're going to become very used to the routine amount of work that you have to do. And you're going to know how to manage your time for this question, for these questions. Someone said, won't annotating take away more time? In the beginning, yes, but then you become really efficient at it, and annotating actually makes you more focused and makes you get to the right answers quicker and faster. So in the beginning, when you guys don't know how to annotate yet and you haven't practiced that skill, it may feel like it's taking longer. But once you keep practicing annotation, in the long run, I promise you guys that it's the best way to take any sort of reading comprehension exam. And I can talk more about annotation, especially when we get to the reading comprehension section, but you don't just annotate and underline things for no reason. I think a lot of students think that that's all that annotation is, and they make notes just to make notes. You have to go in it with a plan, like you're doing things with intention, right? So if I'm going to underline something, there's a point for it. That underline means something to me. It's basically what you're doing is you're creating a roadmap in your brain of where the important things in that essay and that passage are. So then when a question asks you about an important detail, you know where to return in your brain, you know what roadmap kind of you use to go back and find where that answer is in an efficient way without going back and searching the whole passage, without going back and rereading the whole passage, because that's a waste of time. Rereading the same passage 3-4 times in search of an answer is a waste of time. So I'll talk more about this when we get to the reading part, but just to briefly kind of give you guys a preview of how I teach my students to annotate, you need to create like a system for yourself, like a scale. So the scale needs to be personalized, but I'll give you guys a random example of what that could look like, right? So you have different sort of symbols, right? So circle can mean one thing, square can mean one thing, straight line can mean one thing, and squiggly line can mean another thing. So by using these symbols in the same way, every single time you read something, you're training your brain to sort of pull out information in the passage that they could ask you about, or pull out information in the passage that you could quickly then go back to that part and find the answer to a question. So for example, you can circle people's names, right? So then when a question asks you about a particular character, instead of having to skim the whole passage or rethink about where that character was mentioned, you can go through all the circles. And that way your eyes are very quick and you're like, was it this? Was it this? Was it this? Was this? Was this? And you kind of go through it much more quickly, much more efficiently. You can square dates. So oftentimes, the question will ask you about some event in a particular year in a particular month, and you remember that the passage said something about it, but you want to make sure, right? You want to find that detail to 100% convince yourself in your brain, this is what the passage said, and here I'm matching the answer from the passage to my answer choice. I'm getting the answer correct. So again, if you square all the dates, you can quickly find the date that the question is asking you for. And then the harder part is figuring out how to sort of highlight the like main idea, how to highlight character development, but you create sort of different symbols for each of these different things. And that's kind of how I teach my students to annotate in a way that's proper. This is more for reading comprehension, and you can create a similar system for yourself for the grammar as well. Okay, so let's try to tackle this together. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to read the question. Notice that this is what I call a standalone question. This is not the passage question, right? This is a standalone question. We have one paragraph of 4 sentences, and there's going to be a mistake in one of these sentences. So they're telling us, right? They're telling us that there is a mistake. So I know that I'm looking for a mistake. And they're being even nicer to us because they're telling us what kind of mistake. So they're telling us inappropriate shift in verb tense. So they're giving it to us. So I know what I need to be looking for. So guys, in the chat, somebody tell me, what is a verb? It's a simple question. Yeah, verb is an action, right? So importantly, the test is never going to ask you like which one's a noun and which one's a verb, right? You guys are at a level above that, but it's important to understand that you need to have building blocks in order to be able to do well on this exam. So even though the exam will never ask you what is a verb, you need to know what a verb is, right? That's your building blocks. That's your foundation. That's what we stand on to answer more and more complicated questions. But oftentimes when I teach, and oftentimes even when I think about a question, even in medicine, I sometimes force my brain to go back to the foundations when I'm getting confused, to kind of reframe my thinking and kind of show myself like, okay, I know the foundations. Where do I go? What's the next step? Where do I go from there, right? So a verb is an action. Something that you guys need to know about writing, especially on the SHSAT, is certain things need to be consistent. So when I write an essay, or when I even speak to you guys, I'm not going to jump verb tense. I'm going to stay consistent, right? I am teaching this webinar we are learning together. I'm talking in present tense, right? That is teaching, that is happening right now. I'm teaching right now. You guys are listening to me right now. I would not randomly say, you listened to the webinar right now. That doesn't make sense, right? Because the webinar is happening live. So inappropriate shifts in verb tense are important because not only are they grammatically incorrect, but they make you lose meaning when you're reading. Does that make sense? Because it flips meaning for people. So it's really, really important that we stay consistent. And usually when I teach about consistency in verb tense, I also teach about consistency in plurality. So that's not what this question is sort of addressing, but I like teaching these two together. So while I have all 154 of you listening, I want to put that idea, deposit that seed into your brain. When you think about consistency in paragraphs, you need to be consistent in your verb tenses, which is what this question is testing, but you also need to be consistent in your plurality. And I'll explain that in a second. Okay. So let's go ahead and read. So since they're telling us to focus on verb tense, when I'm reading, I'm not going to be like thinking about the commas, right? And I'm not going to be thinking about the nouns. They're telling me that I need to focus on the verbs. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on. So it says, for 14 years, James and his dad have had a tradition of attending Yankees games together. But James is leaving for college next week, and he is agonizing over the fact that attending school in Pennsylvania and working there over the summer meant no more games with his dad. Okay, so what I tried to do as I was reading is sort of underline the verbs that I'm seeing. So have had, is leaving, is agonizing, tending, working, meant. Okay. Okay, so what do we see in is leaving and is agonizing? Present tense, right? So how do I make is leaving past tense? How would you guys switch this to past tense? Yeah, was. So some people are saying left. So this is an important little mini grammar lesson. Okay. So there's different types of verbs, right? You guys don't need to know all these definitions, but when a verb has an is before it, so is leaving, is sleeping, is laughing, it's kind of like the infinitive form of that verb. But again, the language I'm using is not important, right? But if I want to switch this to past tense, I can't just say James left for college next week. I would say James was leaving. And what about if I want to make it future tense? Yeah, close. Will be leaving. So the pattern is this word infinitive has to stay the same. And this is what we're changing for the tenses. Okay, so excellent. So far we know that this is present tense. And like I told you guys, verbs need to be consistent. So this would be a really easy mistake if they randomly changed that to was agonizing or will be agonizing, but they didn't. They kept that consistent. So far everything is okay, right? Present tense, present tense. But then we get meant, and meant is past tense. So all of a sudden we lose the consistency, which is no good because it must be consistent. If we keep reading, let's read sentence 2 together. One night as James is packing, right? So we match again, his clothes into boxes, he hears a soft knock on his door. As soon as he opens the door, James sees what is in his dad's hands and feels a rush of joy. Sees, opens, feels. His dad is holding a bus ticket for a trip home on the weekend in the spring so that father and son can attend a Yankees game together. So if you notice about all the words that I highlighted, they're all verbs and they all match and they're all in present tense. So even if you're not sure about the tense that the words are in, you can see that when verbs are conjugated and they are all in the same tense, they match in terms of style. So you can notice that hears, sees, opens, feels, they all end in S. So that's about pattern recognition. So that's another test taking strategy that I teach, because even if you guys can't tell me, you guys don't have to be, the kings and queens of grammar, and you don't have to tell me exactly how many different types of verbs there are, but you do have to be good test takers, and you have to realize patterns. So even if you don't know exactly what kind of tense we're in, you notice that those patterns are all the same. And all the infinitive words like is leaving, is agonizing, is holding has the same is before it. The only verb that does not match is meant. So how would we fix it? Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So that way we know that our mistake is here in sentence 1. All right. So this was an excellent example of the way that they test you. It's an excellent example of they're giving you exactly where the mistake is. And it's an excellent example of even though the mistake is just in sentence 1, and we could have gotten that just from reading sentence 1, it's important to read further because you just convince yourself that you're correct and you find other patterns as you keep reading. Okay, so the main takeaways from this question that I want you guys to sort of walk away from is the content that we just learned, right? Which is consistency in verb tenses, right? And a parallel thing, which wasn't tested here, but also consistency in plurality. So when I say that, I'm talking about like something called subject-verb agreement. So let me give you guys just a quick example. So if I say something like, the dog walks in the park. All right, that's a simple sentence. Everything's correct. What's my subject? Yeah, dog, right? So that's the who or what. And is my subject singular or plural? How many dogs do I have? Singular, right? So I have one dog. And the verb here is walk, right? That's the dog's action. So the dog walks in the park. So the rule is when you have a singular noun, your verb ends with an S. But if I was going to say the dogs, then I would say the dogs walk in the park. So now my subject is plural, and the verb gets conjugated with no S. So that's another thing that I want you guys to teach. I want you guys to think of verb tenses in parallelity with plurality, because those things need to be kept consistent. So that's the kind of umbrella that unifies them. I'm going to try to draw you guys an umbrella here, so you remember what I'm saying when you review these notes. Okay. And then the last sort of thing to take away here is more of a test strategy, which is pattern recognition. You guys have to get really good at that to be good test takers. Okay. Okay, so let's keep going. Let's do another practice example. So now they say which sentence in the paragraph contains an error in its construction and should be revised. So now they're telling us that there is a mistake in construction. So this is now a different type of mistake, right? They're not telling us look at the verbs. They're telling us look at the way the sentence comes together. So that's important because we know construction, and we just have to find where the mistake is. Okay, so in 2007, so when they say construction, this could mean like parts of the sentence. And it could also mean like the way those parts are combined. So that could mean like commas and all that kind of stuff, just to kind of tell you guys what you're looking for as you're reading. Okay, so let's read. So we have in 2007, visitors to San Francisco, many of whom were attending an international design conference, had booked almost all of the city's hotel rooms. All right, so in a sentence like that, we have modifier on modifier, right? We've got one comma, we've got another comma. So we now have to think about, oh, we got a third comma that I missed. So we now have to think about, are all those commas proper? Are all those parts of the sentence, is the sentence constructed okay? Is it okay for us to lump all those comma pieces together? So the way that I usually think about this is I start everything in between a comma phrase is a phrase, right? So I have to think about, like, why is there a comma there? And is it one of the reasons that I know to add a comma? So guys, put in the chat, what are all the reasons that you know to add a comma? Yeah, you guys are putting list. What else? Connect phrases, yeah, so that's a good one. So that's something like I call that modifiers, right? So if you have like a preposition phrase, so if you have something like in blah blah blah, or before blah blah blah, or after blah blah blah, all of those are like prepositional phrases. So with all of these, we can use a comma. So that takes care of our first comma, right? In 2007. So the first comma is correct. All right, so then you guys said list. Some people also said combinations, right? So if to separate pieces of information, good. So if we want to combine like a dependent and an independent clause, we can use a comma. We can also use a comma to combine two independent clauses, right? As long as we use one of the fanboys. So that's another legal way to add a comma. And then you guys also said like in an address type of situation. In between adjectives, correct. So that's all part of the list. So your list can be nouns, adjectives, or verbs. So all of those can be part of the list. Okay, good. So now let's figure out our next comma, right? So this comma and this comma block off this phrase that I'm going to highlight in the middle. So many of whom were attending an international design conference. So this is a comma phrase. And whenever we have a comma phrase like this, it has to describe something that comes before it. So many of whom. So who am I talking about? I'm talking about the visitors. So in 2007, visitors to San Francisco, many of whom were attending an international design conference, had booked almost all of the city's hotel rooms. So my rule with a comma phrase like this that is describing that is sort of elaborating on something that you mentioned before, right? So this comma phrase that's in between this and this that I just bracked off in red is describing the visitors. So the rule that I want you guys to take away is the way that you check if it's okay that those two commas belong there is you should be able to plop that phrase out and throw it out and the sentence should still make sense. So follow what I'm saying. If I take a nice black fat marker and I get rid of this whole phrase, my sentence should still make sense. So visitors to San Francisco had booked almost all of the city's hotel rooms. You see how that is a full independent thought by itself? We have our noun, which is visitors, and we have our verb, which is that they booked the city's hotel rooms. And that in and of itself is a full sentence. So that tells me that that phrase in the middle, it's legal. It has to be sort of bracked off by those commas because it's an extra descriptive phrase. Does that make sense? And the comma before that is legal also because it's that prepositional type phrase that we talked about. So far in sentence one, I can explain all the commas. They're all legal. I have a grammatical reason for them. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, good. So now let's keep going. So the next part says looking for a way to earn some extra money. And we have another comma. So I'm going to be thinking about this comma. I'm going to be thinking about this phrase, if this comma belongs there, and if this phrase is legal, as I like to say. So whenever we open a sentence with an infinitive or with a ing word, that's what I mean by infinitive, I have to be thinking, who is that infinitive describing? Who or what, right? Because so far I don't have a subject. So looking for a way to earn some extra money. Who is looking for a way to earn some extra money? And that person or that noun of who exactly is looking for that extra money needs to come directly after the comma. So here we do have a noun. We have 3 air mattresses, but does that make sense? Can the three air mattresses be looking for a way to make some extra money? Does that logically make sense? No, exactly. So this is something that we call a misplaced modifier. So the noun that's being modified, the rule is that it has to come right after the phrase that's being modified. So the person is the roommates, right? Joe Gabia and Brian Chesky. They're the ones that were looking for a way to earn some extra money. So they should, those individuals need to be the subject of the main clause, and they need to be right after that phrase, but they're not. The air mattresses are, which changes the phrase of the sentence, which means that here's our mistake in sentence 2. And then if we just take a look at these tips that they're giving us, it's specific to construction, which means that it relates to how words and phrases are placed, right? And the way we combine phrases is commas, which is why the way that I was going through it was I was asking you guys, can we explain this comma? Does it belong there? Can we, what I mean by comma is let's evaluate the phrase and let's decide if the phrase is correct in where it stands. Does that make sense to everybody? So let's talk about some takeaways here. So the takeaways are how to use commas, how to evaluate phrases, and then we learned what a misplaced modifier is. So you can see that just from one question, even if they're not testing all of these things, we can extract all of these things because there could be other questions on your test that do test all these other things. So I'm trying to be as comprehensive as possible. Okay, so now they're asking us, what is the best way to combine these sentences to clarify the relationship between ideas? So again, they like this combination. Combining sentences is important. There are a few things that you should think about in terms of combining sentences. One big theme that's going to keep coming up is being succinct. So that's one big thing. You have to be succinct. So what does be succinct mean? It means do not be repetitive. Do not be redundant, right? So no repetitiveness or redundancy. So do not pick a choice that says the same thing multiple times. Do not pick a choice that repeats itself or uses synonyms to get the same point across more than once. You want to go for a succinct choice. And then you want to, the second part of it is to connect things properly, right? So now the second part is you have to think about the relationship between the two sentences. So relationship between two sentences. And the way that I teach this is you need to think about transition words. So this isn't always tested in this way, but sometimes it is. So sentences can have different relationships together, right? Sentences can be like going off the same point, right? Or making a similar point. So we can say something like furthermore or in addition. Sentences can be contrasting. So then we can use words like but or however. Sentences can have a one sentence can be an example of another point. So then we can use for example or for instance. Sentences can also be cause and effect. So we can say things like because or as a consequence. So all of those kinds of words clue the reader into what the relationship is between those two sentences. So that's what we want to think about as we are trying to figure out what the answer is. Okay, so
and everyone, I just want to remind you, this is all in the handbook. We're going to just move a little bit faster through the pages. So I just want to let you know you will see all of this in the handbook. Okay, I'm going to go back on mute.
Okay, so let's go through this. So in 2019, 15-year-old Corey Coco Gauff defeated Venus Williams in the first round of Wimbledon. Wimbledon is the world's most prestigious tennis tournament. So one way to kind of tackle this is we mentioned Wimbledon here, we mentioned Wimbledon here. So this is a logical point of connection. And then Gauff made history as the youngest player in almost 30 years to win a women's singles game at Wimbledon. So again, connection, and here Gauff and Gauff. So this is probably going to be connected in this way, right? So you kind of think about it as a puzzle. You connect the same characters and the same words in a way that's the most succinct. Okay, so making history at the world's most prestigious tennis tournament in 2019, 15-year-old Corey Coco Gauff defeated Venus Williams in the first round, making Gauff the youngest player in almost 30 years. Okay, so why is A no good? Because this part is really confusing. Putting in the first round here as a random comma phrase and then having another comma phrase is rather confusing. So I think that there's probably a choice that better words this. So I would eliminate this one. Next, we have at the world's most prestigious tennis tournament in Wimbledon, 15-year-old Corey Coco Gauff made history in 2019 by defeating Venus Williams in the first round, making the teenager the youngest player in almost 30 years. So this choice is better, but the focus here kind of focuses on Wimbledon, right? So that's kind of the subject of my sentence, and I open by sort of introducing it as the most prestigious tennis tournament. But here we can see that most of the sentences actually focus on Gauff. So I want to make sure that the choice that I pick focuses on Gauff, makes Gauff the main idea. And then Wimbledon is just the setting for where that main idea is taking place. So that's why I don't love choice B. Choice C in 2019, okay, this is better, right? 15-year-old Corey Coco Gauff made history when she defeated Venus Williams in the first round of Wimbledon, becoming the youngest player in almost 30 years to win at the world's most prestigious tennis tournament. Okay, so this is excellent because it puts the focus back on our main character, which is Corey Coco Gauff, and then Wimbledon is just a setting. And then the same sort of criticism for D. It takes way too long for them to get to the main character. Okay, so just gonna keep going to make sure that we're okay on time. So the other part of the test, so we kind of took care of all the types of standalone questions they can ask you for revising. The other part of the test of the revising section is that they can give you a passage. So let's take a look on what the passage could look like. So in a passage, they give you a passage like this. Notice that all of these sentences are labeled, right? So that tells you that they're likely going to be asking you about the specific sentences to be able to find a mistake, right? And they're labeled for you to be able to easily evaluate or easily go to which sentence has a mistake. And like I told you before, you're not reading this for reading comprehension. You're reading this for revising and editing. So what that tells me is that you should not read this passage first. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to read the question first. So it says, which sentence should follow sentence 5 to introduce the main claim of the passage? So it tells us where to go, but this kind of question is a little bit harder because it asks us about the main claim of the passage. So usually what I would do is I would answer question number 1 like last, because it asked me about the main idea of the passage. And to figure out the main claim, I kind of have to read more of it, right? So usually I would get through like 2 and 3 first. And then by that point, usually there's more than 3 questions, right? Since this is just a sample, we're not going to read all of it. But by the time you get through all the questions, you can then go back and you know what the main idea is. So let's start with this one instead. Which revision of sentence 8 uses the most precise language? When you guys see precise language, that means be specific. That's what that means. So let's go ahead and read sentence 8. So I'm going to highlight it for us here. Through a variety of opportunities, gap year participants can develop new skills and interests. So it says most precise. So that to me means be specific. So where are all the spaces that I can be specific? Through a variety of opportunities, right? What opportunities? That's very general. So what opportunities? Develop new skills and interests. Again, that's very general. What skills, what interests? So I want to answer those questions. So what opportunities, what skills, / interest. That's what we're going to be looking for in an answer choice. So let's find that in our answer choice. So through different experiences and discoveries, gap year participants can develop new skills and interests. Did this fix the problem? No. I still don't have the answer to my question, right? Which experiences, which discoveries, which skills, which interests. So this is still very general. Okay, next. Through a range of opportunities and training, gap year participants can develop new skills and interests. Same thing, right? They did not tell me what those opportunities are, and they did not tell me what those skills and interests are. So next, we have through internships, work, travel, or volunteerism, gap year participants can develop new skills and interests. Okay, so better, right? So I have more specific options now. Internships, work, travel, volunteerism, all of those are more specific. And then
Although, can you quickly just cover up the answers, just because the DOE handbook is cruelly designed so that you see the answers at the bottom. Okay, so if you could just kind of wipe those out. Okay, perfect. That works. That's enough. That's enough. That's enough. That's enough. It's fine. There, perfect. Okay, there we go. Much better. That's good enough. Good enough. Good enough. Okay, good.
Okay, excellent. So like I was saying, this is better, right? Because we answer our question. Here we are specific. Instead of just saying experiences, opportunities, we have a specific things, right? Internships, work, travel, volunteerism. So already choice G is much better. But before we pick, let's look at choice H. Through a variety of jobs, programs, and charities, gap year participants can develop new skills and interests. Okay, so this one is also specific, right? We have jobs, programs, charities. So how would we pick between G and H? Does anybody have any ideas? What would we do? So the goal here is we want to be specific and we want to be succinct, right? So less words is better. So this kind of thing, variety of jobs, those kinds of words are kind of a big signal to you, big red flag. We steer clear of words like variety, range. It's just filler words that people put in their writings, but it doesn't add anything, right? Saying variety of jobs doesn't tell me any type of specific jobs. Programs also, what kind of programs? Instead, something like internship, travel, volunteerism, those are very, very specific types of work or types of program or types of charity like volunteering. So this is what makes G the best answer here. And then finally, which sentence should be added before sentence 11 to introduce the ideas in the third paragraph? So now we have to go back and we have to read sentences 11 and onwards to kind of figure out what the third paragraph is. So we're going to be reading here. So it says, earning money can be a tempting choice, and some young adults may find that they no longer desire a college degree after entering the workforce. While gap year critics do have a valid concern, a 2010 Wall Street Journal article cited research that found that 90% of students who took a gap year returned to college within a year. And the Gap Year Association, a worldwide accredited nonprofit that promotes the benefits of a gap year, maintains that taking a structured gap year invariably serves to develop the individual into a more focused student with a better sense of purpose and engagement in the world. So what is the purpose of this paragraph? So in the purpose of this paragraph, it introduces a counterclaim about gap years, right? It introduces something negative. So this is what we call a counterclaim. So it tells us that potentially if people take a gap year, which is what this whole passage is about, right? Learning to embrace the gap year, that's our title up here. They may not want to go back to college afterwards because they're already making money. But then they use words like while, which are contrasting words. And they say, although this is a concern, here are the reasons why this counterclaim is kind of bogus, because studies actually find that most students do go back to college. And this other association actually suggested that the benefits actually outweigh the cons of taking a gap year, right? So basically what we need to introduce before that is a sentence that does that. That's going to introduce and then refute the counterclaim. So let's look at the options. So we have some gap year opponents worry that young adults who take a break from academia may never return. So that's exactly what the paragraph is talking about. So this is excellent. So the answer here is choice A. Let's just check the other options just to make sure. So usually we would not start a paragraph with in addition to helping students. A gap year could be useful with those financial constraints. So usually you wouldn't begin a new paragraph with in addition, but also this paragraph doesn't say anything about financial issues. So this one's no good. This one's close because they talk about money. So perhaps, but they don't make this point at all about like the lack of money and that being the motivation. And then this is the opposite, right? Because the paragraph is like pro gap. The counterclaim is not that gap years are too expensive. So this introduces a new point they don't talk about. So the best answer here is choice A. Okay, so we went over kind of the bulk of the grammar section. We can have those standalone questions and we can have these sort of revision passage questions. I want to move on to show you guys what a reading comprehension passage looks like. And then we will move on to the math section. And then I want to just make sure to leave some time at the end for questions. Okay, so like I alluded to in the beginning, the reading comprehension section is a different ball game than grammar. In the reading comprehension section, they are assessing your ability to understand up to 6 texts. So what this means is up to 6 texts. Doesn't have to be 6. It could be anywhere between 4 to 6 passages. And again, let's remember that those passages can include many different things. So they list them out for us. So we can have personal essays. So this is what I also call narrative essays. So for these, you look for personal words like personal pronouns to kind of tell you that you're reading a personal essay. You could have speeches, you could have opinion pieces, you can have essays, you can have journals, you can have like historical, scientific, technical, economic, biographies, memoirs, and then you can have literary genres. So literary genres are all kind of like nonfiction. In these cases, you can have poems, you can have adventure stories. These could be excerpts of a piece of like a famous book that maybe you have read of or you've heard of, and all these other things that are listed down here.
Oh, can you make it larger? I want everyone to see it in jumbo mode. Much better. Thank you.
Okay, so basically what this page is telling us is that they can give you quite anything to read and analyze. So you have to become proficient at reading all of these different things. And there are different strategies that we can talk about for the way that you read different types of pieces. And that's kind of how we teach, how I teach my students here at Queller Prep. Like when we have a passage, I dissect it for you and I teach you guys how to read all these different types of passages. So they don't tell you exactly how many of each you're going to get. So it could be a mix. Usually in my experience, they try to do sort of an equal mix, or they're heavier on the literary genre. And usually in my experience, most students struggle more with the literary genres as well. The informational ones tend to be more kind of direct. So they're more like, they're easier to digest because they're very direct. They kind of tell you what they're going to tell you. And the literary ones are more difficult for students to interpret. For these, you 100% have to read the passage. You 100% must, so you must read the passage. You must read the blurb. Sometimes the passages come with the blurb, and you must read the title, and you must annotate. So all of those are musts to do well in the reading comprehension section. I usually do skim the reading questions before anyways, just to kind of give my brain a roadmap of what they could be asking me about. But I don't focus so much on the questions. So if we quickly take a look at their tips for reading comprehension, I'm sure they're going to align with many of the things that I told you about. So read the text carefully. Absolutely. So this, while the grammar passages you can skim because we don't really care what they're about, here you must read carefully. You must take notes, like I said. So you must annotate. And then obviously you read the question carefully. And as usual, you try to figure out the answer before you read the option. Sometimes there's also going to be like a graphic question also, especially in these. So they may include a graphic. So they may include like a table or a bar graph. So that's another thing that we prepare you guys for, and not to be too surprised if you see something like that. Okay, so let's jump into a passage. So usually there's not going to be 3 questions per passage. Usually there are like anywhere between like 5 to 8, I want to say, questions per passage. And they don't tell you exactly how many like editing versus reading comprehension questions there are either. I think usually there are 5 standalone questions, and then there's a passage with grammar like we did that usually has another like 5, 6 questions. So expect like anywhere from 10 to 12 like grammar questions, and then the rest is split into reading comprehension passages. Okay, so if we take a look at the questions quickly, they're going to have us read a sentence from paragraph 1, and they're going to want us to focus on these words, endurance and impossible. And then later on, they're going to ask us something about birds capable of making prolonged flights without sleeping. And then the last sentence summarizes conclusions of the studies, organizational structure of the passage. So just really briefly, that should take you like 45 seconds, just skimming on what they want you to focus on. And then we go towards reading. So just looking at this passage, for me, it's kind of easy for me to tell that I'm going to read this is going to be an informational genre. So it might not be as clear for you guys yet, but it will be clear for you guys at the end of this webinar, and hopefully as you practice more. It's important for you to kind of get into the skill of being able to evaluate what you're about to be reading, because your brain kind of has to shift gears, right? Like if you're driving a car up a mountain, or if you're driving a car flat, or if you're driving a car down a ramp, there's different ways that the engine and the car has to think, right? And the same thing with your brain, with depending on what you're going to read. So how do I know that this is going to be an informational genre? Well, first, I can see that this is kind of written as an article. I see that there is like researchers involved. I see that there's like institutes. I see the structure of the passage. Like I don't see lots of quotations or characters speaking. I don't have a little blurb here that's telling me that it's an excerpt from some story. So it looks very structured to me, and it looks scientific, and just the few words that I can kind of see kind of staring out at me are all scientific. So that to me tells me that I'm about to read something informational. So when I'm reading something informational, what that tells me, and the strategy that I really use, is that this passage is going to be structured. It's going to be structured to a T, and I'm going to use that to my advantage. I'm going to sort of take advantage of that structure. So how am I going to take advantage of that structure? This means that there's going to be a clear thesis statement. There's going to be a point, right, that this article is trying to give to convince me of, or there was some reason this article was written. And then there's going to be details that support that point. So it's my job to sort of figure out what that main idea are, and what these different details are, and what they're using for evidence, right? So what is the evidence? So let's try to use that annotation technique that I mentioned to you guys in the past. So I'm going to try to square dates. I'm going to try to circle names. So square dates, circle names. And I'm writing out the scale for you guys up here, but the goal is that you do this so often that you know the scale, and you don't need to spend time writing all this out. It's kind of mechanical for you as you're reading. Okay, and then like always, it's really important to read the title. So we're going to do that as well. So snoozing while snoring. Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into reading this together. So we have certain types of birds soar for hundreds of miles over land and over sea and never stop to rest. That kind of endurance seems impossible to us. So I'm going to underline endurance and impossible, because I remember that the first question that I read is asking me about this, and it's asking me why they're using these words, right? Endurance and impossible. So those words are kind of, what are they trying to push me towards? Words are all biased, right? So I can say something and I can make it sound really positive, and I can say the same thing and I can make it sound more negative. So when they're saying endurance and impossible, they're trying to get my brain to believe that like these birds are doing something like crazy, right? They are never stopping to rest. That seems like an impossible task. They have such endurance, right? So all of these words are in one umbrella of category. And the answer choice is likely going to like put that into words. And then it explains, since we as people need time to rest and sleep. So it makes a distinction, right? So this is why this is impossible to us, because the birds, they can keep like flying and flying and flying, but we people, we need to rest and sleep. But the birds have endurance and they never stop to rest. Okay, so researchers set out to learn how birds could fly for such long distances without restorative rest. They found that for some birds, settling in for a good night's rest is not always a necessity. So usually in the end of our first paragraph is somewhere where our thesis is, right? So we have this introduction where they are bringing up this topic that birds can fly a lot and they don't have to stop to rest. And this is crazy for humans because humans can't do that. And researchers want to figure out why. And that's what this passage is going to be about, what they figured out. Okay, so then we have in 2013, Felix Lechte and his research colleagues at the Swiss Ornithological Institute published results of the study about the flight habits of alpine swifts, small birds that migrate annually between Europe and Africa. Lechte and his team fitted the birds with small electronic tags that recorded the bird's acceleration and their pitch or angle relative to the ground. The data revealed that the birds remained completely airborne during their time in Africa, a period of over 200 days. Since all animals require sleep, the researchers inferred that the birds slept from time to time on their long journey. However, since their electronic tags recorded only movements such as gliding and flying and not brainwaves, the question of whether birds actually slept during their flight remained unanswered. So they introduced this first study. They introduced the birds that they were studying. They introduced the person who's doing the research study, and they explained what they did, right? They recorded the birds only when they were moving, and they found that the birds were moving nonstop for a period of 200 days. And that didn't answer their question, right? So basically the question is, do birds actually sleep while they're flying? And that's why I starred this however here, because we have a point of contrast that we still didn't answer our question. So next we have the next guy, right? Niels Rattenberg from Max Planck Institute of Ornithology also delved into this question, 2006 article. Rattenberg explained that it was theoretically possible that birds could undergo a certain type of sleep while flying. Like mammals, Rattenberg explained birds experience different types of sleep, including slow wave sleep. Rattenberg argued that during slow wave sleep during flight is plausible because slow wave sleep can happen in one hemisphere of the brain at a time, leaving half the brain awake while the other half sleeps. The eye associated with the awake hemisphere can still function, allowing the bird to see where it was going. Rattenberg decided that he will do an EEG recording of the bird's brain waves, and then that's going to be able to determine if a bird can actually sleep in flight. So in the second paragraph, we have another researcher.
Okay. And everyone, I'm just going to take a quick moment to remind you that because we're finishing at 9 o'clock, after we outline this passage, we're not going to actually answer the questions. We're going to move on to the math section so that we know exactly what to expect from the math section. So Olga, thank you so much. We're going to do a good outline here. We're going to take a look at the questions, and then we're going to take a good look at the math. We're going to do a quick moment to look at the poetry, what the poetry looks like, and then we will move ahead. All right, so I'm going to go back on mute, but just know we're going to do a bit of a touch and go for the remainder of our time to make sure that we show you exactly what to expect in every section. Okay, so we are being mindful of the time right now. I'm going back on mute.
Okay, so if we just keep going, Rattenberg and his team were able to create an experiment to prove this theory, studying frigate birds from the Galapagos Islands. These enormous birds were good subjects because they fly out far to sea to hunt fish. However, they cannot land on the water to rest because the physical build of their body makes them unable to take off again from the surface of the water. So what that means is that they must remain in flight for up to 2 months. So that's why they were good to study. And then from their article in 2016, they outlined their research methods and conclusions. The team humanely implanted EEGs on the skulls of several frigate birds. After analyzing the EEGs while the birds were flying, the team determined that the frigate bird slow wave slept for about 10 seconds at a time at points when the birds were gliding upward via warm air currents, typically the safest part of the flight. While in flight, the birds slept for only 45 minutes a day, which is just enough rest for the birds to function. and during these long flights. They later recovered from the stress of going with very little sleep when they rested for approximately 12 hours each day back on land. Using EEG recordings, Niels Rattenberg solved the puzzle of when birds sleep while traveling long distances. His evidence proved that this theory was correct, and the birds proved themselves to be the ultimate multitaskers as they managed sleep and flight at the same time. So this is our nice little conclusion sentence. So as you can see, when we annotate, you don't have to do really crazy things. You don't really have to take a lot of notes or anything like that. But what you do have to do is create sort of a guideline for yourself. And these passages are a lot easier than some of the fictional passages that they can throw at you. So we have our main sort of people, which is Leitch's study and Rattenberg's study. We have the main question that the article was trying to answer, which is, how do birds fly for so long without resting? And then we have our answer at the end, and we have our evidence, which is all these research studies that they did. And then we have our nice conclusion sentence as well. So let's just take care of one question, like Francis said, and then I'm going to run to the math section to make sure that we are able to answer everything. So this first question is asking us about endurance and impossible and how those words are used. So we've already talked about that. So the reason that they're using those words is because they're trying to highlight that it's so crazy that birds can stay like physically able to fly for, I think they said up to 200 days at a time with barely any rest. So that's exactly what choice A says. Amazement about the physical capability of birds to remain in flight for extended periods of time. Right? They're saying this endurance, which is a very positive word, and that's why we match it with this positive amazement. It seems impossible to us, right? It seems like a feat that's impossible because it's so amazing that they're able to do this. Does that make sense? And then I would eliminate B and D right away because they're more negative, but the passage has a more positive tone about how this is possible. And it's not excitement about the opportunity to share research. It's more like amazement over like, how is this possible? And then asking the question of, let's figure it out. Does that make sense? Okay, so let us jump to the math section. And then if we have time at the end, I'll go back to those two questions. Okay, so what do we do for the math section? So the math section is an entirely different ball game. Like I told you guys, it's 57 questions. 5 of them are going to be grid in, and the rest is all multiple choice. So let's think about the types of things that they can ask you on the math section. They can ask you sort of anything that like encompasses basic algebra, geometry. There's going to be word problems. There's going to be logical reasoning problems. There's going to be problems where you have to sort of compute an angle, a shape, all those kinds of things. So what are their tips? Their tips is to use your math textbooks, seek out math resources at school, your local library, here at Queller Prep. Practice basic questions every day. A lot of them are going to be computational. So what they're saying is things like simplifying fractions, converting fractions to decimals, and applying concepts of statistics are important. What they mean by this is more like probability. That will come up as well.
Yeah. And as we're speaking, I'm not feeling this first bit of advice at all. You're definitely not hanging out at the local library or asking a teacher to recommend resources. We're not doing that. Olga's going to give you very concrete advice as to how to powerfully prepare for this exam. So how about we just cross that out over there? Nope, we don't need that. Okay, because we're definitely going to get rid of that. Bye. We're not using the math textbook. Bye-bye. No, let's just exit out. We're blacking that out. We're going to do targeted SHSAT questions from now until the test. And Olga, please help support my comments. We are focusing on targeted SHSAT questions that you know for sure will appear on this exam. So we will not leave anything to chance. We are going to focus on topics that we know 100% will be tested on this exam. So what we're going to make sure we're doing is not looking at the sky to figure out what's on the SHSAT. What are we going to do? We're going to do the handbook questions. Olga, please write it down twice. We're going to do the handbook questions 2 times. Every single question 2 times. Thank you. I'm going back on mute.
Right. So the exam can sound daunting, especially when the handbook itself is like math resources at school, because that's extremely broad. And I also will argue that I think that the test does go a little bit beyond just the 7th grade curriculum. I think that to really get like as close to a perfect score as possible, you have to go a little bit outside of just the 7th grade curriculum, which is what we do here at Queller Prep. I don't think that they cover geometry in the same way, in the complete way that they do, that it's sometimes tested on this exam. So I think it's really important to do targeted practice questions like Francis was saying. And let's take a look at the questions that they're sort of giving us. An important point is never to practice with a calculator. You guys are not allowed a calculator on test day, so do not practice with a calculator ever. An important piece of advice that they do give here is understanding the meanings of mathematical terms. That is 100% necessary to do well, because they're going to use that language assuming that you know what that means. So they're not going to define things for you. So words like parallel or perpendicular or anything of that sort, they're just going to give it to you, give you those words. Okay, let's look at the types of questions that they're telling us. So we have the sum of 2 consecutive integers is -15. If 1 is added to the smaller integers and 2 is subtracted from the larger integer, what is the product of the 2 resulting integers? Okay, so like I was saying, they are using all this language and they're expecting that you know exactly what that language kind of means. Does that make sense? So sum, you must know that that means addition. That's not going to be defined for you. They're going to be using language like that. 2 consecutive integers, you must know how to turn the words into an equation, into a mathematical equation that makes sense. That's something that you must know how to do. So the sum of 2 consecutive integers. So what they're saying here is we have 1 integer and then we have consecutive. So consecutive means that the numbers follow each other, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The way that I represent that when I don't know what the first number is x, right? That's my first number. And then a consecutive number is 1 above that or 1 minus that, either way. But let's go 1 above that, right? So we say the sum of 2 consecutive integers, so x and x plus 1, and sum means that I add them, is means equals, and they tell us that that's -15. Okay, so now based on that, this is an equation that I can solve. The 2 x's are what we call like terms. So x plus x is going to give me 2x, plus 1 is -15. And now this just turned into a simple equation that I know how to solve. So I can subtract 1 from both sides. And I'm going to get 2x is -16. And then the way that we solve these operations is that you always do the opposite operation, right? So 1 was being added, so I subtracted it from both sides. 2 and x are being multiplied, so I'm going to divide both sides by 2. And I'm going to get that x is -8. That's my answer. Is that my answer? No, right? So that's the difficulty. You always have to go back and see what question do they want. So now they're saying, what is the product of the 2 resulting integers? So I know that 1 integer is -8. And that means that the other integer is -8 plus 1, right? So -8 is x. And then x plus 1 is -8 plus 1, which is -7. So my 2 integers are -8 and -7. Now they say if 1 is added to the smaller integer. So which one is smaller, -8 or -7? So this is another trick. Yeah, -8 is smaller, right? Because we're on the negative scale. So smaller integer is -8. If we add 1 to that, we get -7. And then if 2 is subtracted from the larger integer, so the larger integer is -7, and we're going to subtract 2, we're going to get -9. And then they want the product, which means multiply. So then we're going to do -7 times -9, and we're going to get our answer, which is 63. And if you notice, this was not a multiple choice question, so there's no options. So this would be the sort of fill in or grid in question, and you would just grid in 63 as your answer. So as you can see from here, there's a bunch of things that they tested you. They tested your ability to read and to read really carefully, right? Because there's all these different instructions. First, you have to figure out how to convert the words into an equation. You got to solve that equation, and then you got to follow the instructions. You got to figure out what the smaller integer is, what the larger integer is, how they want you to manipulate those integers, and then you finally answer the question, which is what is the product of those two resulting integers. So you have to be familiar with the language. You have to switch that language into math, and you have to read really, really carefully, okay? All right, so let's try the next sample that they gave us. So this one's a multiple choice. It's not a grid in, so we have our options here. And we have Jenny starts a game with twice as many marbles as Kiko. Jenny gives 5 marbles to Kiko, but she still has 10 more than Kiko. How many marbles did Jenny have to start with? Okay, so this kind of question, I recommend solving it algebraically, but I will say that if you get confused on test day with a multiple choice, it's an important strategy for you to be able to use the multiple choice to your advantage. So I want to show you how to do this algebraically because that's the proper way to teach you how to do it. But then at the end, I also just want to briefly talk about the strategy of using the multiple choice options to your advantage. Okay, so let's say that Jenny is J, right? That's an easy variable to call Jenny. And she starts a game with 2 times as many marbles as Kiko. So Jenny has 2 times K. And then Jenny gives Kiko 5 marbles. So then Jenny loses 5 marbles, right? So Jenny is going to lose 5 marbles. So we're going to say J minus 5. And that means Kiko is going to gain 5 marbles. But at the end, she still has 10 more than Kiko. So J minus 5 is still going to end up with K plus 10. Does that make sense? So before we sort of do that, one thing that I want to do, so J minus 5 is going to end up being K plus 5 because she's going to gain those 5. And then she still ends up with 10 more. All right, so these are our 2 equations. So now, how do we solve 2 equations? So the rule that I always give my students is 1 variable to 1 equation, right? If we look up here, we only had 1 variable x. That's why we're able to solve. Down here, we have 2 variables. We have j and we have k. So that means to solve, we need 2 equations. So the rule is variable to equation needs to be 1 to 1. So if we have 2 variables, how can we solve? Well, we can replace the k. We can solve this for k, and then we can plug this in. Does that make sense? In order to have everything in terms of j. So how do I make this in terms of k? Well, the k is attached to the 2. It's attached to the 2 with multiplication. So I can just divide both sides by 2. And now I have k is equal to j over 2. And now everywhere that I see a k, I can just plug in this. And what did I do? I fixed it, right? Instead of having 2 variables, a j and a k, which I can't solve, I'm going to replace my k in terms of j, and then everything is in terms of j, and then I have an equation that I can solve. So this is going to become j minus 5 is equal to j over 2 plus 5 plus 10, right? Instead of the k. And now everything is in terms of k. So now it can be nice and easy in terms of how to solve this, right? So now we can say j minus 5 is equal to j over 2 plus 15. We can add this 5 to both sides. I'm going to move over here. And then we're going to get j is equal to j over 2 plus 20. And then we just solve for j, and we're going to get that j is 40. Okay, so the goal here is that I also want to show you guys that we can get to this with actually using the multiple choice as well, because the equations can be challenging for some students to figure out. So the way that we figure it out is if if we guess and check and we say, okay, let's say Jenny had 40 in the beginning, that means Kiko had 20, right? Because Jenny had twice as many. And then Jenny is going to give Kiko 5 marbles, right? So if Jenny gives Kiko 5 marbles, she's going to lose 5 and Kiko's going to gain 5. So then Jenny would have 35 and Kiko would have 25. And then even then Jenny ends up with 10 more, right? So when you get the answer, you just double check, or if you can't get the answer, you guess and check with each of these options. And logically, since we're dealing with twice as many, the options that I would start with if I was going to guess and check is either 30 or 40, because those are the only even ones. Does that make sense? And K plus 5 came from this part because Jenny lost 5 marbles and Kiko gained 5 marbles. So that's why I expressed that as K plus 5. Okay. And then I want to do a few more just to show you because there's a really big variety of math questions. So let's try this one that covers geometry. So they tell us the perimeter. So again, what you notice over and over again is that the language so imagine in this case that this picture is not here. They would not be giving us this picture, right? It would be our job to sort of draw that picture out. So I'm going to try to get rid of this so we can talk about how we would get there. So again, they use this language. So it's your responsibility to know what perimeter means. So perimeter means the sum of all sides. If they said area, it's your responsibility to know what area means. If they said circumference of a circle, it's your responsibility to know what that means. Okay. Perimeter of a rectangle is 510. And they're telling us we have the ratio of length to width is 3:2. What are the dimensions of this rectangle? So the way that you would solve this is you would draw a rectangle and you know that the ratio of the width to the length to the width is 3:2. So this is going to be some multiple of 3 and this is going to be some multiple of 2. And that means that this side is going to be some multiple of 2 and this side is going to be some multiple of 3, right? Because the rules of geometry tell me that these two sides are equal and these two sides are equal. That's a must. That's by definition what a rectangle is. So we could say something like this and this, right? To make it easier for ourselves. So it's some multiple, right? So how do I algebraically describe some multiple? I can't just say 3 times some multiple, right? So the way that we do that is we use a variable. And now we want to express the perimeter. So I said the perimeter is the sum of all sides. So sum means add. So what this means is that 3x plus 2x plus 3x plus 2x has to equal our perimeter, which they give to us as 510. So now we have all of these like terms that we can just combine. So 3 plus 2 is 5, plus 3 is 8, plus 2 is 10. So all of this adds up to 10x is 510. And now the 10 and the x are combined by multiplication. So we're going to do opposite operation. We're going to divide both sides by 10. And now we got x is 51. But again, that's not our answer because they're asking us the dimensions of this rectangle. So now what we have to do is take this x and plug it back in to get the dimensions. So 2 times 51 is going to give me 102. And then 3 times 51 is going to give me 153. And then here is my answer. Another way to logically get to this answer without doing all that work is realizing that the length, this is going to be length times width, right? So if the length is a multiple of 3, that means this number, the length, must be divisible by 3. And this number, the width, it's going to be a multiple of 2. So it must be divisible by 2. Does that make sense to everybody? And then based on that, we can eliminate this right away and we can eliminate this right away because 105 is not divisible by 2 and 97 is not divisible by 2. So we can eliminate those right away. And then we just have to pick between 153 and 165. Unfortunately, those are both divisible by 3. But my point here is that if you are running out of time, at least you can eliminate those two answers. Or if you really had to guess And at least you could eliminate those two answers if you didn't know how to solve it. So that's another important strategy that I like to teach in the math, that there's all these sort of logical tricks that make sense. There's the content that you need to learn, but then there's also like all these tricks that you can employ if you actually can't figure out how to solve it algebraically. Okay, any questions?
As we're moving along, Olga, if we can go to the next page, is that okay?
Sure.
As we're moving along, if it's okay, we're going to do a skim. We just want to show everyone a skim. Again, do not look to the sky to figure out what's in the SHSAT. Go to the handbook, go to the Queller prep books, go to the Queller materials. This is exactly what you need to study and practice over and over and over again. All right, can we go to the next question also? Let's just kind of skim as we're with our last few minutes. I want to make sure that we're skimming correctly.
Okay, so this question, I won't explain it, but just a skim of the parts that you need to like sort of should be jumping out at you is notice these words. Does anybody know what a log or adult is? No, these are symbols, right? So they're testing you on your ability to make ratios. So far, I just want certain things to scream out at you, right? So here they're testing geometry, right? They're testing on your ability to know about shapes, perimeter, area, all of that is fair game. Here they're testing about your ability to convert words into equations, right? That's algebra. Words into equations. So algebra is coming up, geometry is coming up, symbols and ratios are coming up. If we look at the next few questions that they're giving us, these are the grid in ones. So these, somebody had a question earlier on how we grid in. So it's all given here on how we can grid in. So there's many
Make it larger. Yes, everyone pay careful attention to this because you could get the right answer, but then you're not gridding correctly. Okay, so please pay attention to this.
Correct. So there's many different ways that you can grid correctly. So here is an example of how to grid 5. You can grid it here, you can grid it here, you can grid it here, but you can't grid 5, 5, 5, 5, 5. Obviously, that's wrong. But anywhere you put the 5 is okay. There's a place to put a decimal point. That's okay too. You notice that there is a negative sign, so you can get a negative answer. So that's completely fine if you get a negative answer. You will notice that there is no fraction bar, so you cannot get a fraction as your answer. If you get a fraction, you convert it into a decimal, and that's how you would include it. Okay. Here is them showing you how to grid in a negative option. And here is them answering your question. You can put the 0, you don't have to put the 0. Both are accepted because both are equivalent. So these are both acceptable ways to grid in a fraction. If you get a repeating decimal, they're going to tell you to round it. And they'll tell you to round it to the nearest 10th or to the nearest 100th. And you'll just plug in, like if you get 1/3, you'll just put 0.33. Depending on what the instructions tell you. So it's never going to be ambiguous. They're going to tell you what to round it to if it is a decimal. So here are some ways not to do this correctly. If your answer is 38, you cannot leave the space here the way that they did it here. So that is absolutely not applicable. If your answer is 3080, you must put the 0 at the end. So both of these with the giant X's in there are things that you will not be doing on the test. Those are not okay to do.
And reminder to pay special attention to how to grid, because unfortunately we do have these issues all the time where the students didn't practice gridding enough. Do not also, please, Olga, if you make sure you mention this, do not wait until the end of the test to grid. Do everything one question at a time as you transfer answers. Make sure you carefully transfer these answers one question at a time.
So
I'm going back on here.
As you go, carefully transfer your answers. I agree, because you can run out of time and just within seconds, they're going to take away the paper from you. So if you haven't put in all your answers, you're going to lose all that hard work. Another point to be made is make sure that you practice grading. So when you're taking these practice tests, I would recommend that you print out like a multiple choice grid for yourself for the SHSAT that you can just Google, or I'm pretty sure this packet actually even comes with it. So you can just print out that one paper. And as you're taking the test in a timed fashion, you should also practice gridding, because that's the way that you're going to take the test in real life. And all the Queller practice tests that you guys, if you have taken them before, you haven't, they always come with a grid sheet as well. Okay, so here are some important notes about grid-ins that we can read together. The circle must be completely filled in for you to get the answer correct. If you write an answer in the box, but you don't actually fill the circles in, you will not be scored. It will be a 0. If your answer written in the boxes does not match the way that you have filled in the circles, it doesn't matter if you scored the right answer, but if you gridded in wrong, you will get, that will not count. So for example, in example 8, the correct answer is 308, but they wrote 308 up here, if you notice, but they gridded in this circle. So they're going to get the answer wrong, even though they got 308, which is the right answer. Does that make sense to everybody? So again, it's really, really important that you guys are careful and you grid correctly. If you grid more than one circle per column, so for example, if you went back here and we gridded like a 3 and a 4 here, like this, that's incorrect. That's going to be automatically marked wrong. So don't play games with the grid. If you accidentally add a decimal point, so for example, if you put 5 point or 5.0, that will just count as 5. So that's not incorrect if the answer there is 5. Okay, so we gone through basically the whole part of the test, like the content part of the handbook. I do want to quickly skim this part with you guys also about getting ready for test day. Just basics of what you must bring and things that you should not bring. So obviously you can't bring a calculator, you can't bring any electronics, you can't bring any paperwork, you can't bring anything except water in terms of beverage.
Can you make it larger, please? Let's make the screen larger.
You can bring a watch, but that watch must be silent and it cannot be like an Apple Watch. So it cannot have any electronic capabilities. You cannot use a pen, so you absolutely must have a number 2 pencil with you, and an eraser. You must obviously have your test ticket that's going to allow you to sit for the test. And you can bring, a lot of students ask if they can like bring a highlighter. You can bring all that, but you don't have to. You can bring your cell phone, but you cannot obviously use it. You cannot have it on your person during the test. So you cannot have it in your pocket or in your pants or in your hoodie or anything like that. They will tell you exactly what to do, where to store it during your test site, but it will 100% have to be off. You are allowed to use a mechanical pencil as long as it's number 2. So whether it's a mechanical pencil or just the basic yellow pencils, either is allowed. Just make sure that your lead is number 2, because that's the only thing being read by the Scantron, which is what's being graded for you. And then obviously what they will provide you with is the test booklet, and then the answer sheet, which is where you're going to grid in. And then you'll also have scrap paper. The scrap paper will not be graded, so you can use that however you please, but understand that it will not be graded. Your booklet will not be graded. The only thing that will be graded is your Scantron, which is why it's so important for you guys to grid as you go. And also understand that the scrap paper will be collected at the end. So don't like write something for yourself that you want to look up later. All of that stays at the test. You cannot take any of those papers home. Test day expectations, you must be on time. You will arrive based on the time that's on your test ticket. In some cases, they're going to obviously try to get you into the test room as fast as possible, but different things happen. You definitely want to be early. There's always traffic on these days because there's hundreds of students that are coming to the same school to take an exam. And there's going to be like a big crowd. So you absolutely want to be there early. You want to get a good night's rest. They're going to be taking photographs of you in the testing room, and you must stay in the testing room the whole time. So you can't go outside for a break. Your only time that you can leave the testing room is for to use the bathroom. And the full time that you have is 3 hours. It's also important for you guys to know that you have 3 hours and you can go through the sections as you please. So they're not divided 90 minutes math, 90 minutes reading. You are able to manage your time. So you can start with the math section if you please. You can start with the reading section. You can do part of the reading section, skip to math, go back to reading. So all of that is entirely dependent on you and how you want to control your test. And that's why it's important to practice beforehand in order for you to know how to manage your time and how to take the test that works in the best place for you. And then here at the bottom part, again, they're showing us again how to grid. They're showing us the right way to grid, which is just filling in the dark circle of the answer choice that matches the answer you want to pick, like fully, completely. You cannot just put a check mark. You cannot put an X. You cannot half bubble it in. You cannot bubble in 2 things or 3 things. All of that will be marked as incorrect automatically. So here I'm going to zoom in nice and bright. This is how we bubble in correctly. So again, it seems like we're belaboring like a common sense point, but this is really, really important because this is how you're going to be graded. So really, really essential that you guys understand. And then obviously this last part about student misconduct, again, self-explanatory. You must follow all their instructions so they do not kick you out of the test. You cannot do anything in terms of sharing the questions, talking about the questions after, passing notes, talking during the exam, using any recording device. All of that is obviously cheating. You cannot have any, like, even if your cell phone's on your person and it's off and they catch you, that will be called cheating. As soon as the examiner tells you to put your pencil down, you must put your pencil down, or they will call that cheating as well, or student misconduct, which is again why we teach you guys to bubble in as you go. Because if the instructor says put your pencil down and you have 10 questions that aren't bubbled in, that's a big, big problem, which is why you should bubble in as you go. And make sure that you have a good eraser in case you need to erase. To really clear out the dark bubble, and you re-bubble in whichever is your right answer. And then this part, what happens after the SHSAT, which is already, let's get to the SHSAT before that. So let me take some time to answer some of your guys' questions. So somebody said, what tips can I give for reading faster in order to efficiently finish the ELA section? So annotating, knowing the genre of what you're reading will help you go faster. And practicing reading, doing more practice tests, and just practicing reading passages or articles online will help you read faster and read at the level that they're requiring you to. So you'll get faster and faster as you keep practicing. Will there be a visible stopwatch? So there should be a clock in every single room, and the proctor should be updating the time, but we cannot guarantee that because I have no idea who's going to be in the room with you. So I always recommend to my students that you bring your own watch. And I also recommend that you guys sort of practice. When you practice, try to practice timing yourself with that same watch that you're going to bring to make sure that you're comfortable with doing that. And it's not something that you decide to do on the test day, like, oh, this is the one time I'm going to use this watch, and it's just going to distract you. It seems like you are allowed to bring an electronic watch as long as it doesn't have like a calculator or any ability to record or communicate or take pictures or anything like that. Are you able to rip out your grid sheet? Yeah, I think usually the grid sheet is just a separate piece of paper, so it's not going to be in the booklet, so you don't have to keep scrolling back and forth. What tips do I have for fiction specifically? So perhaps, like, usually I can teach a whole 2-hour sort of webinar on how to read, like how to, the strategies for fiction and reading comprehension specifically. But just briefly to answer your question, it's really important to think about like the plot, to think about the different characters, to think about like the lessons, to think about why they picked this specific excerpt and what they're trying to sort of suggest to you. So those are kind of brief tips on the categories that you should focus on if you're reading a piece of fiction on this exam. Do I have any other resources to help with SHSAT practice? So again, I can't stress enough that this handbook is a major, major resource. Those 2 practice tests are a major, major resource. You should do them at least twice. And the other resources, Queller Prep has its own textbooks and its own questions that we release that are excellent as well. And we try to match them to this level, if not make them more difficult to really prepare you. The practice tests graded from this handbook. So they give you the answer key at the end so you can grade yourself. There is not sort of a score conversion, right? Because the score that you get out of here, you can calculate a % correct score. They do not release an official scale of how to convert it to the score out of 800. There are scales online, and Queller Prep has also developed kind of our own scale that we use. None of this is confirmed by the DOE, so they've never officially released their scale, but we are pretty good with predicting sort of how this test is rated, and there are OK scales online also, if you Google it, that should kind of give you an estimate of how that score will be scaled to a score out of 800 based on your % correct score. And there are also resources online that you can look to that will kind of tell you the approximate cutoffs of the schools that you're interested in from the years before too. But none of this information is officially released by the DOE. Tips to figure out the main idea of a passage. So that depends on if the passage is like informational or more like figurative or fictional. If it's informational, it's kind of the way that we did it together today. The passage is very structured, so you need to know where to look to get the main idea. If it's more figurative, then that's much more difficult, and you more have to look at the common themes throughout the paragraphs to get the main idea. Any tips on improving the grammar section? Absolutely. Practice, practice, practice. Know your grammar rules. Know the main things that they test. So there's like certain topics that they test that I tried to hit on today, like those construction mistakes, comma splices, precise language. All of those are almost like 100% guarantee that you'll get at least one question on those things. So cover the things that we call high yield, the things that you can like with certainty expect them to test you on. There will be word problems on the math section. You practice for them by doing practice questions. How much time should be required for each section? I usually recommend that you try to split it 50-50, so an hour and a half per section. For me personally, do I prefer starting with the easy or the hard subject? So during my time, the test wasn't like this. I think it's a really personal decision. I would probably start with the subject that I'm stronger at just to make sure that I'm getting all those points directly. Tips for poetry. Again, we can do a whole like lesson on how to read poems, but the important things is being able to identify repeating themes in a poem, knowing the different things that they test. So looking at rhythm, looking at poem style, understanding figurative language is huge for poetry. So you should know all about metaphors and similes and alliteration and all those kinds of devices and what different reasons that they're used for. If you're running out of time, should you randomly bubble in answers? If you notice that you're running out of time, you should do your best to try to run through the questions and use those strategies that I was showing you today to try to eliminate answers as fast as possible and at least like narrow your answers down. If you're absolutely stuck on time and like the test is about to run out of time in 2 minutes, yes, I would say randomly bubble in answers. Okay, I see all the thank you. Thank you guys. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for accommodating my schedule and being here in the evening time. I know there's so many of you and you all came on time and you listened for the full 2 hours. I really, really, really appreciate all of you. I hope that this was useful. I'm happy to answer any more questions. A lot of them are being buried in all these thank yous, which I very, very, very much appreciate. But I hope that this was very useful to you guys. Last pieces of advice is to just keep studying. You guys have a solid 2 months. I think it's really important at this time in your study journey to have a plan for what you're going to do for those 2 months. So you don't, like Francis says, you don't just stare at the ceiling. You need to have a game plan with what you're doing every single day, especially now that school has started again. So you guys are going to be busy with classes. So it's really important that you plan your time accordingly and you know what you need to do and what your weaknesses are in these 2 months that are left and how to appropriately sort of highlight those weaknesses.
Everyone, I'm going to take you guys off mute. We're going to count to 3 and we're going to say thank you to Olga. So we're going to count to 3 and my cute little son is in the webinar right now. Olga, so you want to wait, Jacob, can I spotlight you?
Yeah.
Yes. Can I spotlight you? You're such a cutie. Hold on, I'm spotlighting you. Olga, help me out with this piece. Jacob. Wait, let me spotlight you. There you go. Hello, look at his face. Look at his face. Say hi. Say good luck.
Good luck.
Say thank you, Olga.
Thank you, Olga.
Okay, everyone. So we're gonna count to 3. I'm gonna unmute everybody and we're gonna say thank you to Olga. Ready? 1. Jacob, can you count to 3? 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Say good luck, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Good luck. Good luck, everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Olga. Thank you for your time. Olga, you're still gonna have juice left to tutor my 2-year-old one day, right? Don't forget. Don't
One
forget.
day.
Thank you, everybody. Say bye. Say bye, Olga.
Bye, Olga.
Say
Bye,
thank you so
Jacob.
much. Say look at my slime. Look.
You're my slime.
Wow, what color is it?
Say bye, Olga. Bye bye.
Bye, Olga.
Say mwah. Say mwah. Mwah. Mwah.
Mwah.
Isn't it so much fun too? It's like the parrot age. Mwah. Say mwah. Mwah. All right. Everyone, thank you again. All right. I'm very happy that we are doing. Thank you, Olga. Thank you for a great webinar. All right, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you. Thank you again. All right, here we go. Oh, are you saying bye to Olga? Say bye, Olga. Say good night.
Good night.
Oh,
Good night.
oh, look at this flirting at 2 years old. I'm so proud of you, Olga. Jacob, definitely go for her. She's a doctor. We're definitely going for the doctor. You hear me? Say yes. Yes. Okay. So everyone pay attention. Good luck. We're going to have a bunch of webinars and make sure Queller Prep is always your favorite. Tell friends and family. Queller Prep is my favorite. Jacob, say Queller Prep is my favorite. All right. Everyone, I'm going to send you the video. Olga, they liked your video so much. They all want to hear it again. Do you believe this? You're impressed? They want to hear it again.
I'm impressed.
So everyone, you can actually spend another 2 hours of your life listening to this. This will be uploaded on the Queller Prep's YouTube channel. So you will get to hear this again. So if you want to keep hearing this over and over again, you can replay. And also Queller Prep is starting classes. That's what we're known for. We're famous for the classes and the rigor. As you know, Olga is a medical student in medical school now. I am an attorney and I'm done. So this is, Queller Prep is definitely a step above the rest in terms of rigor. So please keep that in mind. The classes we run starting next week are no joke. We will also be running a stress reduction webinar. Olga will follow up with a date. So make a note for that one, Olga, next time you have. We're going to run a stress reduction webinar.
Daniela,
We're also going to be running in here.
We're
also
classes. I wish we had time.
all right, everyone. Bye. Say bye.
Bye. Thank you guys so
All
much.
right, we're all set. And just keep in mind, we will keep you guys busy. All right, have fun. Say bye. Say good night.
Bye. Good night.
Say good night. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Goody goody. Yes. All right. Bye, guys. Olga,
Good
you
night.
can close.